Hello, I am Manawiltus, and today I'm here to discuss some more Star Trek power scaling. And some of you might wonder, why am I making these videos? Specifically around the Star Trek power scaling, and the reason for that is, of course, I didn't see a lot of this kind of videos on YouTube. I saw some other power scaling for some other fictional franchises, and I thought, well, we need some more science fiction stuff. It's something I'm interested in, so I decided, you know what, it might as well be me, the person making it. But if anybody out there has any suggestions as to how I could make my videos better, or would help in doing so, in providing information, or perhaps having a discussion on such matters, I would be happy to do so. Anyway, today I am here to discuss some power scaling from the first battle of Chintaka. As you can see on the bottom here, ignore this. This is unfinished. This right here is based on the episode where the Tal Shiar and the Obsidian Order team up to attack the Founder's home planet. But in the episode, we clearly see a Jem'Hadar attack ship easily damage a Kelvin class. But let's not talk about that right now. That's unfinished. I still have some confirmations as to whether or not that's good power scaling or not. Of course, the Jem'Hadar were able to damage a Galaxy class, which is probably stronger than a Keldon class. So it does make sense to some extent, but let's get back on topic. Anyway, in the battle, we see the first battle of Chintaka. Essentially what happens is that a fleet of, I think the Federation, not Cardassians, the Federation, the Klingons, and I think the Romulans were there as well, go to the system of Chintaka and attack in order to capture that away from the Dominion, specifically the Cardassians who occupied the planet. Now, defending the planet, there is, I think, a wing of Jem'Hadar attack ships. Well, not a wing, multiple, but there were some Jem'Hadar attack ships and the Chintaka Planetary Defense System. I don't think there's any official name for it, but that's a general statement of what it is, which is composed of the Chintaka orbital weapon platforms and a central facility that powers the platforms. And essentially what we see, the course of a battle, we see the Klingons break away to fight the Jem'Hadar, and unless I'm mixing up battles here, it might be something else. But the combined fleet flies into the field filled with the orbital defense, the orbital weapons platforms, and they aren't active when the battle starts. However, as the battle moves on, as some of the ships are already in this field of the weapons platforms, the weapons platforms activates because the central power facility is activated, and then they are in for a tough fight. And in fact, we can clearly see what happens. So the Chintaka Planetary Defense System overall, I'd have to say, is more powerful than a Defiant class. As we see also the Chintaka weapons platforms in the episode, they fired on the Defiant, and the Defiant sort of rocked a bit, but there wasn't too much damage to the Defiant. Now, of course, that could be because of plot armor, but also we see the Defiant wasn't able to damage the weapons platforms when they were in their powered-up state. So overall, I'd have to say that the system overall, for those of you who aren't aware of how this works, is you've got this asteroid that's the power plant, essentially, for the weapons system, and you've got all these different weapons platforms in orbit around the planet, and each platform is individually shielded, And the central power plant is also shielded. And the Defiant fires quantum torpedoes at the power plant, and it does nothing. It does absolutely nothing to the power plant. With all these Galaxy-class starships and the Defiant and other starships in there, it does absolutely nothing to the power plant or to the weapons platforms. They aren't able to disable any of the weapons platforms while the shields are up. And the only way to get the shields down is to destroy the central power plant, and the only way to do that was to do some unconventional warfare, which is therefore outside of the general power scaling aspect, where they put a Federation warp signature onto the power plant so that the weapons platforms would fire on the power plant. But because, and also this is really great for power scaling as well, because this means that the weapons platforms themselves are able to damage and in fact shoot through shields that the Defiant, along with other Federation starships, was not able to shoot through. So this really puts it above the Defiant in power scaling. Now, you might be wondering, why the Sovereign class? We didn't see any Sovereigns in the battle. Well, the reason I put it there is because we see in the Battle of Sector 001 in the movie First Contact, the Sovereign class takes out a Borg sphere by launching quantum torpedoes at it, which happens a year before the Battle of Chintaka in the canon. So we see a similar attack being launched against the main power plant, and it doesn't do anything with the quantum torpedoes being launched at it. Now, admittedly, there aren't the same number of quantum torpedoes being launched, and some might say, well, torpedoes in Star Trek have a variable yield depending on how they're set up. But we have to remember that the Defiant was in a battle situation, and there wouldn't be any reason for them not to have a high yield on their quantum torpedoes. Logically speaking, anyway. And of course, we saw, I think I saw an Akira class get taken out by the orbital weapons platforms, and also the orbital weapons platforms were able to damage the D'deridex as well as the Vorcha. And we can the Romulan D'deridex and the Klingon Vorcha, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the ship classes. And those are the main capital ships used by the Romulans and the Klingons respectively. Now, of course, later on, they both get better ships. Well, not later on for the Klingons. They already have the Negvar, but that's not a main ship of the line. That's more... originally, it's a flagship, but I guess eventually they get more. Anyway, on another note, Galaxy class over Galor class, that's pretty simple. But something I did up here is I think I revised this area with putting the Defiant class above the Excelsior class refit, specifically the Lakota, which had been refit. And if you look at the battle in that episode, I said in a previous episode of this series that we see the Lakota got damaged slightly more than the Defiant. And by that I mean that they had more casualties in the fight, even though they were a larger starship. And so generally speaking, I'd say the Defiant is slightly more powerful than the Excelsior class refit. If you also look in the episode, you see the captain of the Lakota is upset because there was ablative armor on the Defiant, and she didn't know about the Defiant having that, which complicated the fight. In addition to that, neither side used quantum torpedoes, and it is implied in the dialogue that quantum torpedoes had a good chance of finishing the fight in allowing either of these ships to destroy one another, which really goes to show you that if they're saying that a quantum torpedo is effective, or quantum torpedoes are relatively effective against Defiant class, a Defiant class starship, it really shows you how powerful quantum torpedoes are, and just how powerful the shields are on the orbital weapons platforms and the defense system as a whole, and specifically relating to the power plant. Now, from the battle, I have decided that the power gap is very slim between the Defiant and the Lakota. So if I'm going to power scale the Defiant as being more powerful than the Intrepid class, in that the Defiant came out at around the same time as was commissioned at around the same time as some of the Intrepid class starships, and the Defiant is a purpose-built warship while the Intrepid class is not. And then you take into that the Excelsior class refit, specifically the Lakota. I keep having to mention that because I know somebody is going to take me out of context and think, oh, I'm saying that Enterprise B, which I don't even know if that counts as a refit, it just is a slightly different model, is more powerful than the Defiant, which it obviously is not going to be. So because of the bigger gap in power scaling between the Intrepid class and the Defiant class in relation to the Defiant class and the Excelsior class refit, specifically the Lakota, I have to say that the Excelsior class refit, as exemplified by the Lakota, is more powerful than the Intrepid class, but I still don't really have a solid power scale for the Sovereign class. And another thing that I'd like to mention before I finish up is... let me just make sure I didn't miss anything. No, I didn't. Regarding power scaling, if you're going to use something, for example, Star Trek Online, which I have played once, but I didn't have the best internet connection, so it became a bit troublesome playing it, so I didn't play too much of it. But I looked at the ship charts on it, and I can tell that what they were trying to do is they were trying to make a balanced game, or a game that is relatively balanced. So of course, it's not going to be the same kind of power scaling as it is in the show, from what we see in the show. Or the shows, it's plural because there's more than one. So I have to say overall that video games aren't usually the best source for Star Trek power scaling. What's always the best is to look at the episodes themselves and rewatch some of the battle scenes. Especially in Deep Space Nine, they had a lot of good battle scenes there. But good in the sense that we see a lot of we see big battles and a lot of starship against starship fights. In the Next Generation, there were a few of those, but generally speaking, it was the preference to resolve conflicts peacefully. So we don't have as much power scaling there. In the original series, there wasn't too much of that. Oftentimes, the plot revolved around going down to a planet. Voyager, I guess there's some big fights in there, especially with a Kazon early on, which is another thing to power scale. So I'm going to think a bit more on how to power scale this. I'm not sure if I'm exactly happy with this. Now, of course, in light of what some Jem'Hadar attack ships did to a Galaxy class, and a Galaxy class scaling to the Galar class, and the Keldon class, which being around... Oh, speaking of which, the Cardassian ATR 4107, also known as the Dreadnought missile, is, of course, extremely powerful. It's got quantum torpedoes. It's amazing. and looking at the Chintaka planetary defense system, which, by the way, is Cardassian technology. A lot of people downplay the Cardassians by just looking at the Federation having generally more powerful ships than the Cardassians. But we have to remember, there are a few powerful stuff that the Cardassians have done in the series. So we can't really downplay them too much. And of course, I think the most powerful things that the Cardassians have is the Chintaka planetary defense system and the ATR 4107. So the question is, of course, which one wins? No, I'll leave you to discuss that in the comments below. What would a Cardassian ATR 4107, and by the way, for those of you who might say, but wait, it was modified by Torres. Well, the weapons weren't added by Torres. It was more security stuff and the programming that was modified by Torres, rather than the actual structure or the weaponry of the missile itself. So in the comments below, I'd like to see a discussion. Maybe rewatch the episodes relevant to see which one is more powerful. Would a Cardassian ATR 4107 plow through the Chintaka planetary defense system and destroy the planet? Or would it, well, destroy the planet? I don't actually know about the yield. It's a bit difficult to calculate the yield in Star Trek. By that I mean the yield in energy. Or sometimes TNT equivalents are used, or joules. There's a number of different ways to calculate it. So, of course, it's a lot more easy. It's a lot easier to calculate with, for example, the Constitution class, where we do have some canon information, and I still want to go over that at some point. But anyway, thank you all for watching. Hopefully this has been interesting, informative, and most of all has led to some degree of thought about what the power scaling is, and just thinking about who would win in a fight. That's always interesting to think about. And I do remind you that the name of this document, you might not be able to see it too well, but the name of the document is Science Fiction Power Scaling. By that I mean, it's not necessarily just Star Trek, so I can go anywhere with this. So thank you all for watching. Hope you are having a good day, and I will be seeing you all next time, and I will toss over and out.